Harthacnut was a Danish king who ruled England for a mere 26 months in the middle of the 11th century. His reign is shrouded in mystery. There are more things about Harthacnut that we do not know than we do know. For most of the things we do know, there are two versions, and we can only guess at which one is correct. One thing that we can say for certain: the mysterious death of this forgotten and unfortunate monarch brought about the fall of 3 northern European dynasties and changed the direction of history in a profound way. For a monarch of whom one contemporary chronicler said he did nothing worthy of a king, the impact of his death is in some ways still being felt 9 centuries later. Harthacnut should never have been born at all. Long before his birth, his mother Emma of Norway was the wife of the Anglo-Saxon King of England, Ethelred II. The two were married in 1002 in an attempt to improve relations between Normandy and England. Unfortunately for both the English and for Emma, Ethelred II was a weak and ineffective ruler. However, the pair did succeed in producing 2 heirs to the throne, Edward and Alfred. Shortly after his marriage to Emma, Ethelred ordered a massacre of Danes living in England. There are no known estimates for the number of Danes killed in this reckless act, but it is believed that the dead were numerous and widespread. In 2008, excavations at Oxford uncovered the bones of 37 murdered Danes, ranging from just children to about 25 years old. This cruel and shocking act prompted the outraged Danish king Svein Forkbeard to launch an invasion of England to seek revenge on the English king. Emma and her 2 children fled to the mainland of Europe. Ethelred II attempted to defend his kingdom, but died suddenly in 1016. He was succeeded on the throne briefly by Edmund Ironside, his son from an earlier marriage. Unlike his father, Edmund was brave and fought well, but the resources left behind by his unskilled father were not enough to thwart the Danish onslaught. Svein Forkbeard had died in 1014, but he was followed by his son Canute, who quickly subdued the English kingdom. When Edmund died suddenly in November of 1016, Canute was left the undisputed King of England. Emma was left a widow with 2 young children. She had every reason to fear for her life and the lives of her children. However, rather than acting as a wrecking ball, Canute showed respect for the English kingdom, and even for the dynasty he had just crushed. As a warrior, he admired his defeated enemy Edmund, even laying an expensive cloak on his grave as an offering to the dead king's honor. Because of this, it is not altogether surprising that Canute married Emma in 1017. The sons of Ethelred were sent to live in France. Although this marriage began as a political match, affection developed between the two, and in 1018 Harthacnut was born to the royal couple. Canute reigned for 20 very successful years, dying in 1035 in Dorset, England. He was 45 years old. Canute had a son who was older than Harthacnut from a previous marriage. His name was Harold Harefoot, and he became king of England. Harthacnut, however, was made king of Denmark. Before he could reign, he had to fend off another claimant to the throne, Magnus the Good of Norway. Rather than go to war, Harthacnut and Magnus negotiated an agreement that the first of them to die would bequeath his kingdom to the other. Harthacnut and Harold Harefoot were never on good terms, and while the agreement with Magnus the Good was being worked out, Harold killed Emma's son Alfred, who she had with Ethelred II. On Harold's orders, Alfred's eyes were put out while he was captive at sea, and he died from his injuries. This earned Harold the hatred of Harthacnut, who held his half-brothers, all sons of Emma, in high regard. Understandably, Emma was distraught at the death of her son, and his mother's grief affected Harthacnut's decision-making. Because of this, he decided that he would invade England and depose Harold Harefoot, his half-brother, both sons of Canute. Learning of his intentions, the leading nobles of England communicated secretly with Harthacnut, advising him that they would support his invasion and elect him king. At this time, kings of England were elected by the nobles rather than the title automatically passing from father to son. Before Harthacnut could launch his invasion, Harold Harefoot died suddenly on 17 March 1040. Not taking the uncertain situation for granted, Harthacnut, still only 21 years old, set off for England with his full invasion force of 63 longships and was welcomed as a hero. Because he invaded what was now his own kingdom, Harthacnut had to pay his army, which he did by imposing a heavy tax on England. This tax made the conquering king unpopular in his new kingdom. After imposing his tax, Harthacnut set out for revenge on Harold, who had made vengeance more difficult by dying. Harthacnut ordered Harold's body removed from its grave and beheaded. His body was thrown into the Thames, but was later recovered after having become tangled in a fisherman's net. It was buried in a modest plot in an out-of-the-way churchyard used by Danes then living in England. Because of this, and the excessive taxation imposed by Harthacnut, he quickly became unpopular with his English subjects. In England, kings were expected to seek the counsel of the nobles, even if they didn't always follow it. Harthacnut refused to do this. He was used to wielding absolute authority in Denmark, and saw no need to change in England. In 1041, England suffered from a bad harvest. People had less money, and were often hungry. Harthacnut chose this time to increase the size of the English navy, and use those ships to patrol his Danish kingdom. And he raised taxes again to pay for it all. This caused tempers to boil over, and 2 of his more aggressive tax collectors in Worcestershire were chased into a town where they were hung by an angry mob. Harthacnut ordered the town to be burned to the ground and the population killed. Although most of the people managed to escape, the town was burned, and anything of value was carried off by the king's army. Later, in the same year, a northern earl named Adwulf, who ruled his lands with little input from the crown, drew the unwelcome attention of the king. Harthacnut could not tolerate the idea of a semi-autonomous earldom operating within his kingdom. The earl sought peace with the king, and was promised safe passage to travel to a meeting between the two. But Harthacnut broke his promise and had the earl murdered. This caused the king's reputation to suffer even more, with the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle calling him an oath-breaker and betrayer of his good word. The coinage of Harthacnut follows closely the model of that produced by his father and half-brother. Due to the brevity of his reign, only one main type of coin was issued, a silver penny known as the arm and scepter type. There are 2 types of these pennies, those bearing the name Canute, as he was known in Denmark, and those bearing the name Harthacnut, as he was known in England. Although the chronology is still uncertain, it appears as though the 2 varieties were minted more or less during the entire reign, from June 1040 until June 1042. The example shown here was minted in London and bears the name Canute. It was minted by a moneyer named Edward. Harthacnut's only surviving half-brother, Edward the Confessor, was living in Normandy at this time. As the only surviving sons of Emma, they were close, and at the end of 1041 Harthacnut invited Edward to return to England. In early 1042, Edward was named heir to the throne. This is unusual because Harthacnut was now only 24 years old, and should be expected to marry, father heirs of his own, and rule for many years to come. This is why there is speculation that Harthacnut was suffering from some disease that he knew would lead to his early death. Some historians have suggested he was suffering from consumption. In June of 1042, Harthacnut was attending a wedding in London. The chronicles record what happened next. Harthacnut, king of the English, was standing at the wedding feast and drinking with the bride and guests, when suddenly, even in the very act of drinking, he fell down speechless, and thus remained until he gave up the ghost. He was then carried to Winchester, where he was buried at the side of his father. Although this sounds more like a death by poison than that from a long disease, we can never know for sure. In eulogy, The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says that Harthacnut did nothing worthy of a king as long as he reigned. He was certainly unpopular with the people he ruled over, and his reign was a disaster for any dynastic ambitions he or his family may have had. His death ended his family's rule in Denmark, as he had agreed with Magnus the Good of Norway that whoever outlived the other would rule both kingdoms. His death also ended the Danish dynasty in England, founded by his father in 1016. England would now pass to Edward the Confessor, the Anglo-Saxon son of Ethelred II and Emma. His death also set in motion the events that would lead to the conquest of England by William the Conqueror in 1066. Edward failed to produce an heir, and may have promised England to more than one claimant. In any event, the Norman conquest ended forever the line of Anglo-Saxon kings of England, and created the England that we know today. Had Harthacnut lived, it seems likely that a civil war would have broken out, and the king probably would have lost his throne, as he lacked the support of either the common people or the nobility. In the rare instances that Harthacnut is remembered at all today, it is as the king who ended 3 dynasties, unfairly taxed his people, refused to listen to wise counsel, and ruined a perfectly good wedding celebration. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. That way you'll be the first to know when new videos are published. Thank you for watching.